One thing that attackers are always trying to do is increase the effectiveness of their denial of service attacks. And one way they can do that is to try and amplify them. So, how can they make the attack larger than, such as it has a greater effect on the attack and also the target? So, one way that has been very popular in the past to amplify this attack is to use the DNS, and in fact this approach you will be seeing in this lecture, sometimes referred as a DNS reflection. So, and the reason it can be called reflection will make sense in a moment. I will talk about it. So, let's walk through how it works. So, we have an attacker and they are going to make a small spoof DNS request now. DNS requests go out over the UDP, which is a fire and forget protocol. So, you send them of the request and you hope it makes the destination. There is a no error checking the resiliency like in TCP, as we also just saw in the UDP and ICMP layer. You can also spoof the source IP address in the request header. So, what we are actually getting here is an attacker making a small query to a DNS server and this spoofing the IP address of the target. They want to take down now, and very specifically what they are trying to do here is to make a DNS query which is small but result in a large responses. So, for example, the attacker may request all the DNS records for a particular zone. That would create a large amplified response, which is then sent to the target machine, the one whose IP address was spoofed as the original DNS request. This again also hides the original source the attack as far as the target is concerned. All of those requests are originating from the DNS server, and in fact many times we have seen cases where the victim has gotten in touch with the DNS provider and said, hey, can you guys stop dosing me? And of course the DNS server provider is not the culprit. However, this is usually possible because there are open relays, in other words DNS server, which are accessible by anyone. So, they do have some level of accountability here. So, I have represented this simple attacker, simple DNS server, and but what happens when we further amplify this by the attacker and controlling a botnet? So, let's go and take a look. Let's scale up this DNS amplification attack. So, we will take our attacker, and the attacker might have a mere 1 megabyte per second connection, a very small connection, but it doesn't matter because that is enough to take the communication with their zombie machine. So, remember, these are the machines that are in the botnet. Now, each one of those machine has 1 gigabyte connection. So, for example, there could be servers that are attacking, and the attackers controlling that result, and by controlling that result in them and being able to send the request out of that 3 gigabyte a second. So, they are going to use the DNS amplification. So, each one of those machine is now communicating at 1 gigabyte, which gives a total of 3, and they communicating at a whole bunch of different DNS dissolvers. and these resolvers are going to be used as amplifiers, and the fact that they are going to amplify, it is a factor of. Now what this means is a request can come in very small way, like it's a 100 bytes, but the response are very large. A factor of 10 would mean is going to be 1000 bytes. Now because we have a factor at 10 and you have got a 9 machine, so all receiving 1 gigabyte of a second. The amplification is going to result in a 90 gigabyte per second attack, which against the target. So there is amplification in play that 1 megabit from the attacker turns into 3 gigabit from the zombie time into 90 gigabits. So as a result of DNS amplification, this style of attack is honestly effective because the attacker just keep leveraging, and they leverage by having the botnet, and then they leveraging again by using these open DNS resolvers that can return a much larger response than a request which came into them. So that's a really good example of what certainly in the past has been a common. And amplification attacks, there are a fear open resolvers ability today, but there are other forms of amplification attacks as well. So let's go and take a look at couple of them. So a few other ways that a DDoS can be amplified. One is SNMP, which is the Simple Network Management Protocol, and in fact we have seen SNMP used in greater effect in the past. In fact, amplification up to a factor of 650 times, so that the 10 bytes going in can result in a 6,500 bytes coming back out. The other end directed to the target system. Now fortunately there aren't a lot of those open at the web at this time. They tend to be more constrained to the internal network. So another protocol used in amplification, it takes, and so another protocol used in amplification, so it takes is NTP, the network time protocol. Now this can return very large result by the monitor command, and what this command can do is just return the address and up to the last 600 machines that the MTP server interacted with. So that means that there is a much larger response than the request that were into it. Now NTP is like SNMP also runs over UDP, and the source IP address can be spoofed. So that's the underlying construct that all of those amplification attacks are taking advantage of, making sure that the large responses is going to somewhere other than where the request came in from. And in case of NTP, that amplification factors can be up to a couple of 100 times. So perhaps not quite as big as SNMP, but still a massive factor on top of the size of a request that came in. Yet another form of application to take is using the SSDP, which is Simple Service Discovery Protocol. And in this case, SSDP is used for the advertisement and discovery of network services. And what we have seen in the past is attackers querying home devices with UPnP services, and which can then result in responses are much larger than the incoming requests. So the same amplification pattern again, and like SNMP and NTP or SSDP also runs over UDP. So mostly runs over the UDP, which of course can have forged through IP address headers. So in this regard, they are all very similar, even though the protocols are designed to do quite different thing. Amplification attacks are enormously effective because of the leverage they give the attacker, but they do rely on those protocols being openly accessible and vulnerable to forged through IP addresses. So we will look at some of the ways that we can mitigate against this attack in the future lectures.